I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Law. Each week it's my privilege to bring guests to this program that teach us something about how the law is made, how it's enforced, how it's supposed to work, how it sometimes doesn't, and has to be repaired. I usually learn something from our guests. In fact, most often I do, and I hope you do as well. And I hope you appreciate your responsibility in making sure that it's your law and it's working for you. Today's guest is somebody I've known for a good long time, and you can tell by the gray in our hair, it is indeed a good long time. He's attorney Mike Siddall. He's a senior partner with Hurling Clark, one of the powerhouse law firms in the Valley. I have a son that's a partner in that law firm, and I'm very proud to know both of them and many of the other fine lawyers in Hurling Clark. He's going to tell us a little bit about his view of some things that are happening to your law. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George.
You've got an interesting and varied background in the law. Would you tell our audience a little bit about it?
Sure. When we started out, I was doing a lot of insurance defense work, defending insurance companies, insureds, doctors, and the like. And probably about 20 years ago, we switched, and our emphasis is now on plaintiff's personal injury work at our law firm. So we've seen it from both sides.
Well, and some people have accused me of being a liberal, and they don't accuse you of being a liberal. You're a little more of a middle of the road and maybe even a conservative. Do you agree with that?
I would agree. I would agree with that.
And I have tangled with you, and I didn't always win when you were defending insurance companies very skillfully over a period of time. So you appreciate that both sides have a right to able counsel and a fair fight. And the civil justice system itself is about many things, but it's about fairness, it's about compensation, it's about safety. How do you feel that the civil justice system helps people be more safe in our society?
Well, in many ways, in terms of products liability, for example, it has been lawsuits against manufacturers that have curtailed a lot of the unsafe products that have been made over time, and without lawsuits, the manufacturers would continue to make money off that, regardless of whether or not the product itself is safe.
And the ability to go to the courthouse, the ability to get counsel, the ability to present your case is so important to people, not only in terms of their individual justice, their compensation if they have been wronged, but it's a deterrent to bad and irresponsible behavior. I think that's probably the most important consideration to society.
It probably is. You can take, for example, guarding on machines in factories was a real problem years ago, but for the lawsuits against the manufacturers, now almost all those products are guarded and the worker is much safer.
Well, I have been practicing law into 40 some years, and you're not too far behind me. Think of how much safer highways, cars, chemicals, medicines, testing, all of these things are the result of lawsuits, and the fact that there's a penalty on General Motors or Ford to make an unsafe Pinto or Corvair or something like that. We are the safest country in the world, and the right of the citizen to get to the courthouse and present the truth and the whole truth, I think, is the major reason, don't you?
I agree. I think it is.
But unfortunately or fortunately, none of us can rest while the legislature is in session. And there's certainly some interesting things going on all the time in the legislature, in Congress and in Madison, especially right now in Madison. And I think there's some scary things, some legislation that you and I have discussed briefly off camera that's in our legislation. It's an assembly bill right now called I'm Sorry. Want to explain that one?
Sure. That's a bill that was sponsored by two legislators that are both physicians, and if that becomes law, any apology or condolence or sympathy that a doctor or healthcare provider would tell the family as a result of a medical mistake or an injury or death because of their negligence would not be admissible in court, which that part of it is fine, and most trial lawyers would agree with that because it opens up the lines of communication between the doctors and the patients. But the bill goes farther than that, and it prohibits the introduction of a admission of fault or responsibility by the healthcare provider. And that's the part that's really objectionable. So a doctor could come out of surgery and tell the wife, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, I was a little shaky, and I cut your husband's aorta, and he died. That would not be admissible into evidence at trial, and that may be the only way that she could ever win and get compensation for the wrongful death of her husband.
Well, there are other states who have I'm sorry legislation, and the I'm sorry legislation in most states, and you and I don't object to it, is that a person in the medical arts should be able to say to a widow or a victim, I'm sorry, it didn't turn out very well. Excuse me. But this is much different. In Wisconsin, the legislation goes further than in any other state. An admission of fault, an admission of cause, an admission made by somebody else, for example, the nurse saying the doctor was intoxicated, none of that, the admission of responsibility, none of that would be admissible under our Wisconsin law. And who else is there except the medical people when it goes wrong?
Right. It does really a disservice to the victims, to the general population of Wisconsin. Many states have I'm sorry legislation, but it's limited to an apology, sympathy, condolences, those types of comments made by healthcare providers, which everybody agrees that's fine. That shouldn't be admissible in court. But this goes farther than the law in any other state prohibiting admissions of liability and fault. And it can go way beyond that. The statute, the proposed law as written, is missing some definitions. How far, to what extent is it a representative of the family member? For example, if one example is if there was a young child that was had a breathing tube in, was in the hospital and kept pulling it out, so they had to restrain him. At night they didn't restrain him, but they were given orders to watch him constantly. The next morning the parents got there and the boy was dead, the tube was out. And then in a deposition later on, when the family brought a lawsuit, the nurse broke down in the deposition and admitted she falsified the records and never went in and looked at him that night. Well, is that admissible or not? Or do they get away with, fraudulently changing the records, and the victim again is left out in the cold?
It really has nothing to do with I'm sorry. It's got something to do with cover-up, immunity, irresponsibility, no responsibility at all for wrongdoers, and the ability to destroy or conceal evidence. If we are interested in safety, and we certainly are, in the hospital, in the operating room, if we're interested in honest records, we're interested in responsibility and accountability. Those are good words for conservatives, aren't they?
They are.
Then this is bad legislation, isn't it?
It is bad legislation, and we don't have a medical malpractice crisis or even close to one in Wisconsin. The number of lawsuits, medical malpractice lawsuits filed last year, I think, was about 147. I mean, it's just not a problem in this state at all. And what should really be looked at is a way to stop the medical errors, which are causing thousands of injuries and death on a regular basis in this state and elsewhere.
Absolutely. Most years there are more moose sightings in Wisconsin than successful med-mal trials. Doctors are here to help people, and hospitals are here to help people, and we want to help them help people and encourage them to help people. But taking away their responsibility and giving them the right to cover the evidence and bury it isn't good for anybody. It's not good for the patient. Let's take a break and we'll talk about some other things that are coming mighty close, if not as close and on the button, in terms of going the reverse direction for safety under current Wisconsin law. We'll be right back.